Mckeegee Williams is a motivational speaker and author, bringing to the world unique and uplifting perspectives on thriving, self-betterment, and mentorship. Seeing him in the world today, you would never fathom his childhood experiences, or lack thereof. Jeffrey grew up on the south side of Chicago in one of its poorest and most violent neighborhoods. He survived a young life of hunger, desperate living conditions, parental neglect, condemnation from teachers, and alienation from peers. The brutal passing of his uncle became a wake-up call for Jeffrey and a catalyst to finding a way out of the repeating nature of his circumstances. As he forged his new path, he became a source of authentic support and empowerment to youth growing up in similar circumstances, and his inspiring messages gained him invitations to speak in spaces far beyond his neighborhood. Jeffrey now is a sought-after motivational speaker for a variety of audiences, from young people to business leaders, reminding us all that our inner attitudes can change our outer landscape and send ripple effects far beyond our own lives. I'm your host, Catherine Jelinek, and this is the Expanders Podcast, presented by The Skinny Platform, the place for entrepreneurs with something to share and who want to be heard. Hello, everyone. It's Catherine Jelinek with The Skinny Platform. I am so pleased to be here with Jeffrey Mckeegee Williams, author of We Are Right Here, motivational speaker, and founder of The Speaking Realm. Welcome, Jeffrey. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm so thankful that you're here with us and really excited to share your story on this podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today.
Jeffrey, you know the first question we're going to start with today, and I'll just tee it up for you. In your childhood, when was the first time you felt an inner spark of what you desired to bring, be, or do in the world?
So that's a pretty hard question for me because, I think when we think about a spark, there are many elements that has to come together to allow a spark to happen. And I can say that unfortunately, those pieces didn't come together as of what I wanted to do. But I think having a very special, woman in my life, my grandma, who's no longer with us in this world anymore, but having her in my life to help, guide me through and just seeing how hard she worked in life, I think that gave me a sense of really wanting to serve people, because my grandma spent her entire, 66 years of her life dedicated to others and making sure that everybody else was okay. And so that would, unfortunately, a spark for what I wanted to do was not there, but I definitely think me being able to see someone dedicate their life really gave me a sense of wanting to do something impactful in this world.
It's wonderful to have that reflection on your grandmother. And even if the spark didn't come in your childhood, I got it. I'm fortunate enough to have read your book, and your book is right behind me here.
Yep.
And it's an excellent book that I can recommend to our listeners.
Thank you.
And I do know that was it in your adolescence then was the first time perhaps that the seed of what you are now finding yourself doing was planted, or that it first began to emerge in you. Can you share a little bit about that, when the idea of speaking and being motivational for others began to emerge for you?
Yeah, well, going into college, after I did the gap year program, I did a gap year program out of high school, which the job was essentially to give back by being in a school and being as I like to say, third party teacher, and really tutoring kids. And I had a mentorship thing that I did. I initially thought I wanted to be a teacher, and I was going in with that mindset. But very quickly, I found, and I always say this, but I didn't come to speaking, right? Speaking came to me, and I always found myself on stage somehow. Someone was inviting me to do some sort of guest speaking, and yeah, it was one of those things where I realized how impactful people saw my story, and I realized that I have to I have to do this, right? Like, I'm being called to do it. It's a way that I can reach a lot of people, and I truly think my story does provide that aspect of really transforming the way people not only see life, but how they live theirs as well. And so I would say I thought I wanted to be a teacher, but like I said, I kept coming home to the speaking aspect. And so, yeah, I love this. It's a great experience, and it's great to be able to impact people in that way.
I love that. I also feel like the best things in life arrive to us rather than us having to seek them. And so tell us more about that story then, the one that you're referencing and that you tell in your book. You grew up on the south side of Chicago. You experienced a difficult childhood with little nurturing, none from your biological parents. Share with us about your background, your younger life, the neighborhood you grew up in.
Hmm. Yeah. So before I do so, I think it's important that we add proper and meaningful context to my situation in my neighborhood growing up. So I grew up in a Fuller Park neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. To most people who've never heard of the neighborhood, it was very small. And when looking at it from an optimistic lens, truly, it's pretty forgettable if you had to spend a day there. It is a neighborhood just north of Inglewood, which is the neighborhood that is pretty familiar with people who are invested in Chicago. And it's just south of the White Sox Stadium. So I actually lived on Street 45th in Princeton, and that's actually exactly a mile south of the White Sox Stadium. So heard a lot of fireworks from the White Sox Stadium and a lot of excitement, and I can truly say that that's where the excitement left is the after the cheers of the Sox winning a game, but which is not really often. But yeah, so there are many things that I've discovered in the last few years of my life that truly highlights the stark reality that I had to exist in, that I didn't really realize I was existing in. So, for example, there's this government page in Chicago called cmap.gov, and they rank the median incomes for every neighborhood. And Fuller Park was, like I said, it's the third poorest neighborhood in Chicago, and the median income is $15,000 annually. And that's compared to $71,000 for the rest of Chicago as the median income. Um, so not only that, when you look at the stats for the average person who, the median income for someone who doesn't have a high school diploma, you see that that number is $34,000. So that means that the average or the median person in this country that doesn't have a high school diploma is still making about $20,000 more annually than, those in my neighborhood. Um, Furthermore, according to Neighborhood Scout, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
I just want to make sure that I give it the full, the so the per capita income of everyone living in the Fuller Park neighborhood is lower than 99.5% of all neighborhoods in the country. So my neighborhood was zero point 0.5 worse when we think about per capita income. Furthermore, Fuller Park always ranks at the top for violent crime in a city. And there's this popular YouTuber. I don't know if people have heard of him, but he's called Briggs, and he essentially Mr. Briggs. And what he does is he looks at geography all across the country to inform people on where to live. And he made a video 5 years ago that was the 10 worst neighborhoods in the country, and Fuller Park was on his list at number two. And it's a very disheartening experience to see your neighborhood as ranked as one of the worst in a country. But also, in that video that he shared, he did slideshows of the neighborhood, and my house was on his slideshow. It was actually the first one he showed. So it
Wow.
was an extremely tough upbringing. So I say all that to add context and to we have to ask from there, what does that translate to my personal life? So I grew up in a Fuller Park neighborhood in a very rat and bug infested townhome. At the peak occupants in a home, there were nine of us growing up in a three-bedroom home. My I was the third of four children, but my parents barely had the monetary resources to support one child and a parental attitude to support none of us. We were eventually sent to go stay with my grandma in that townhome, and while she did the best she could, there just wasn't enough to go around. And so there were many nights that there was no food to eat. And, I always tell people that, my upbringing was a mirroring image to the neighborhood, and that I felt as though I was decomposing before I even hit puberty. That's truly how, grim the situation was. I shared a bedroom with two brothers. We had these like two twin size bunk beds. And when my son JJ got his first bedroom, that was the same size as the bedroom I shared with my two brothers for our entire time in that house, which was over a decade. We slept on the same mattresses. I actually shared a twin size mattress with either brother until high school. But by then, the beds were so old and worn out that springs were coming out of the bed, and it just made it very hard to live. And it's truly interesting when I reflect back on my upbringing, and I see how far I've come, and I I truly have to ask myself, like, did I really go through all of this? Like, it's so crazy to think about it. It's like looking at a story that it's hard to identify when I think about my upbringing, but I know I was there, and I can place myself back there sometimes, and remember and be grateful for how far I've come in my life, because the circumstances were not conducive to a fully functioning adult in society. So yeah.
Yes. And can you share a little bit more too about the role or lack of role of both of your parents and your relationship, or where things stood with each of them? And, from there, give us some reflection. You're a parent now too. I know JJ's 3, wonderful little boy. And just give us some of your reflections now in terms of what do you carry within you in terms of how you see being a role model for others, especially young males, and then what your frame on parenting.
Yeah. Well, to, I guess, add more context to my parents. So, like I said, I was sent to stay with my grandma permanently when I was 6 years old. And at first I didn't, really understand it. And, quite don't understand it much today. But I do know that they were still present in my life. They were present, but not nurturing. And so I could physically see them present, but that was essentially where the sense of belonging stopped for me in my relationship with them. Um, they, lived, so we lived in a townhome, and they kind of shared the upstairs part of the townhome. So they were right above us, and yet we were still living with my grandma. And I've heard some very disheartening stories about, my auntie and my grandma who were trying so hard to raise us, and they would actually have to argue with my mom because she felt more of importance to go out and party every night, and there were nights we had no food, and my grandma's trying so hard to divide money up. We sometimes, like, I would say every once a month every year, we expected the gas to be off, right? So no hot water, and we had to use come up with different ways to get clean and just do the essential things to live. And yeah, I there was really nothing positive that I can draw from the experience I had with my parents. My mom was the sole disciplinarian, so if my grandma couldn't deal with us anymore, then that meant that my mom was gonna um, come physically punish us or really abuse us, and do whatever she could to make sure that she didn't have to take on that responsibility again. So that was essentially their roles. And my parents ended up split. They split up when I was 13, and um, from there I saw them both a few times. They decided to live their lives, but um, translating that into my relationship with JJ, I think in any capacity that when I think about the Fuller Park neighborhood, it does have some significance to how I show up as a parent. While it may not be inspired by, while I may not have been inspired to take anything from it, there were many instances where there were many cautionary tales, and it's really forced me to be intentional with how I show up as a parent, um, and how I show up as a leader, and just doing everything I can to make sure that he has a very worthwhile experience. His upbringing looks nothing like mine, and I think that's truly because I make an effort to just be intentional. I'm not perfect, not a perfect parent at all. We no one is. At least I don't think so.
No,
But
no, none of us are.
but yeah, I truly think that I'm doing the best I can, and I can truly see that in how he shows up in the world. He's a very bright kid. He loves to read. He loves to explore, and that I envy his childhood truly. And I know there was a question posed as to how me wanting to be a role model eventually shifted to me being a role model as a parent. I would say that the circumstances were too different to give a definitive answer, because when I wanted to be a role model, I talk about in my book how I would have loved to have been a big brother to a younger boy, because I just wanted to be a role model and guide someone. But I look at that as a hands-on approach, where you are truly having to stay strong and stay mentally on guard in a very tough environment, versus now I get the luxury of showing JJ, my son, how to live through my own life, through how I show up every day. And he's a toddler, so there are a lot of hands-on moments, but for the most part, it's truly a hands-off and letting him explore life experience. And I truly think he's been enjoying that and really appreciate that. So I think the role model aspect has shifted from this means of helping someone to survive in this tough environment to now watching my son essentially take the lead on a lot of things that I wouldn't have dreamed of growing up. So hopefully that answers the question.
It absolutely does. First of all, it's beautiful to hear about how you encourage JJ's exploration in the world, his own discovery of himself and what he enjoys. And then, second of all, that makes a lot of sense what you're defining here, just the stark difference in setting and environment, and what you were referring to in your book of wishing you had a younger brother to be able to nurture in the way that you wanted to have nurtured, been nurtured. Um, Totally different set of experience as being a role model, male role model, in that environment versus with JJ now. And I think we can talk about this in a few questions from now, especially reflecting on your city year experience, but that's probably more of one of those examples of being a role model, even when you're living in a setting that's still very challenging, and showing up for others in a way, even though you're still dealing with a lot yourself. So I'm sorry to tee that up now and then and not go there yet. But I'd love to just make sure we get through a few other parts of your story
Yeah.
first. And one of those is thinking about your brothers and that the lives they're leading now and how it's so different from yours. In your book, you mentioned that because of the lack of nurturing, they hit significant roadblocks. You in general received the same amount of nurturing. So my question is just what was different then for you? And knowing you in the world, have such a shining light to you, and just curious as to, like, even as your parents weren't there, I know your grandma was, but what really fed the development of that light? How did your story turn out to be different?
Yeah. Well, I think being the third um, oldest of four, I think you have a lot of examples to see. And I wanted to provide a very specific example today that I talk about in my book and talk about in a few presentations that I give. But there was a time in 2013 where my oldest brother was on the phone with a friend, and they were reflecting about they were weeks away from graduation, and they were reflecting on what they would do next. And I must have been sitting on a bed. Like I said, our we had two twin size beds next to each other, and that pretty much made up about 95% of the space in the room. There was little walk space in between, so you only could, use one foot at a time. But so I must have been laying in the bed at that time. But he was saying some things that, truly opened my eyes, and I think it was a pivotal moment in realizing when I got to that place, I'd be next. But he was talking about how he didn't know what to do next in his life and how no one showed him how to do much of anything, including, how to be a man in his words. And so he was just going on. And, you know, I, at first for a while, reflecting on that experience, it's kind of hard to believe that no one shows you anything, right? Like if there has to have been something you're taught, and it's up to you on if you want to apply those things or not. But if one could only grasp the coldness that existed in our home and how we truly interacted with our mom, that statement and their eventual outcome in life wouldn't surprise anyone. I sat on that bed 2013, 13 years old, going through my own stuff in middle school, just got through the worst academic year of my life, where I brought home at one point a zero point 0.5 GPA out of a 4.0 scale. So I wasn't doing much better myself, but I laid in that bed and I had to ask myself, hearing him say he has nothing and no skills and nothing that he can translate into his post-secondary career. Is this my life as well? Is this what I'll have to grapple with when it's my turn to graduate from high school as well? I wasn't ready to deal with that then. That was a very heavy reality. And so I didn't. But I knew going into high school, for even though I played around in high school, I didn't take it serious. There wasn't much chances that we got to go outside and really be kids. So the only place I could release that youthful energy was at school, and so I didn't take it serious. But I knew in the back of my mind that when it was my turn to step up and graduate high school and figure out what's next, that I wouldn't have that support. And so, luckily, I would say having the examples of my brothers and having also some support from a couple organizations that worked in my high school, those things really allowed me to see an outcome that was different than my brother's. I believe that the parental nurturing coupled with the environment has a significant effect on anybody growing up, no matter where you grow up. And I can unfortunately say that the life that we saw and how we were raised truly is reflected on their adulting experience. Both brothers are currently working dead end jobs. They're both having a very hard time navigating the world. My oldest brother has a felony record, and so that wipes out his high school credibility. And my second oldest brother didn't even get a high school diploma. And last time I checked, he still doesn't have a GED to this day. And they are both fathers to multiple kids with different partners, and their outlook was a mirror image, and it was almost expected that would be my reality as well. And so um, it kind of gives you a bit of guilt when you think about it. But I think understanding that me on the trajectory that I am, and people can see my story and how my life transition would hopefully give them some inspiration to turn their life around as well. And so that's a very precious thing to me personally. So yeah.
Jeffrey, what was that point of transition where your path no longer continued down the road that your brothers eventually did, but yours took this turn into something unique and very different from those around you in your growing up setting? What was it that shifted for you?
Well, as much as I hate to tell a story, just because of how heavy it is, it truly is to understand who I am and how I got to the place I am currently. But in 2013, as I talked about, it was my worst academic year. I was in middle school, right? And I didn't have the luxury of being a kid. And I think as a parent today, that is my number one hope for JJ is that he get to be a kid as long as he can, because I didn't have that reality from my earliest memories. But 2013, performing horribly academically, I knew that I couldn't fail the year and have to repeat it. So I truly didn't care about it. That was the only place I could be a kid. And so, what I thought would be a smooth sailing to next year, I was met with a very hard reality when my granddad passed away from cancer. And that was a tough experience. I don't think I was truly surprised by the outcome because I visited him in a hospital weeks before he passed. And so, we knew it was something that was coming soon. And it was a very hard time. But 3 days after my granddad was buried, I showed up to the funeral. It was a very, rough day. But 3 days later, my granddad's son, so my uncle, which is my granddad's youngest son, so my dad's youngest brother, he would go to Harvey and essentially try to cope with this loss of someone he was very close with. And he ended up buying a car that happened to be stolen for in like a drug deal. And the police would try to question him about this stolen car, and also he was under suspicion of committing a murder. And so they had motivation to pull him over. And at the end of the day, two young kids that were younger than a then 13-year-old me would lose a dad. He would be beat to death by those six police officers in Harvey. And that was an extremely hard blow for my family and myself. I wasn't very close with him, and I wasn't very close with many people on my dad's side of the family. But for some reason, that hit me harder than anything has in my life to this day. I was very angry about it. I was very bitter about it. I didn't know how to grieve in that situation. I think we have seen many times in history up until that point in 2013, police against civilian hostility. So I kind of took on that anger that was felt by a lot of people, and since that moment, I kind of saw my uncle as like my God, right? Where he would be with me in spirit throughout my life moving forward. And everything I had done, good, not so good, I always kept him in my memory, and he truly, moved through me. And I would say that having someone in my life that I could look up to in spirit was something that kept me going. And I knew that I wanted to, you know, truly get justice for him, which to me is impacting other people through his story and through my story. And so no matter how much I played around in high school, I always kept him in my memory. And it's actually a very, I think, touching story. But when I graduated college, I actually didn't give away the last ticket. I kept that ticket for him. Um,
Wow.
as so, I had five tickets, and people were, trying to buy the ticket from me, and I kept the ticket because I really wanted it to be a memory of someone who, put more into my life in spirit than anything else, and that gave me the drive to continue to move forward and to look past the environmental hardships that I faced. So I actually didn't give away that last ticket, and it was very symbolic to me that he really was in my memory every day. And so I would say that was a very, heartbreaking story, but it was one that truly allowed me to turn my situation around.
Oh, wow, Jeffrey. And thank you for sharing that with us here about your uncle. And it's very moving to hear about you holding that ticket for him from your college. It's a beautiful story. I know that you have a lot to say on forgiveness, and you share that especially in the context of your parents and know a lot of the things that you've been through. Can you and I know that that wasn't where I was expecting to ask the question, but knowing like so much that you've been through, so much hardship, And the way that you move in the world is with such effervescent positivity. And in reflection of how much you've been through, just share with us your philosophies around moving forward, forgiveness, how you process and handled all of what happened with your uncle and your growing up experience, and how you move forward today with those things in your heart
Yeah,
and live differently.
yeah, absolutely. So in a book, I talk about, forgiveness, and there's a chapter about closure, and essentially I ask, what is what is justice, right? And when I think about forgiveness, I essentially see that as a vehicle to closure in our lives. So often there are people or situations that don't go our way and that we don't end up on the ideal side of. And it's easy to harbor a lot of hatred and a lot of bitterness and just frustration. And while it was fine for me at the time, at least I thought, I realized that it was very hard for me to move forward in my life. I was given so many great opportunities. Um, and I moved in with a family up north after I graduated. After I did the gap year program right before college, and so I went from the third poorest neighborhood in Chicago to the highest earning neighborhood, meet by median income in a city. And that was a monumental moment in my life to see such a perspective and cultural shift. And despite all of these things that I was being blessed with, these opportunities, these rooms that I was entering, I realized that my capacity was limited because when I was in a Fuller Park neighborhood, it was easy to continue to keep my head down and look to what was to come. But now I'm in this environment, right? The neighborhood was North Center, and I was in this environment that struggle wasn't a normal occurrence, right? The only levels of struggle you saw were minor inconveniences compared to what I had just came out of, right? And I thought that I could keep my head down and just continue to push forward to what I wanted to do, but I realized that there was something that was keeping me stuck, right? There was something that wouldn't allow me to embrace this new reality. I'm seeing families in this neighborhood that are walking down the street together, doing family bike rides to the ice cream shop, and just all of these experiences that truly made me very just bitter, right? I was bitter about seeing all of these families have the life that my dreams couldn't muster the capacity for. And now it's hard to move forward because you have this new reality in your face that is a reminder of how you were raised every single day. It was truly a tough experience, and even in a home that I was blessed enough to be in, and I called them today my family, and a woman who allowed me to stay with her family that summer. She's my mom now, and to see how much, or at least I thought, right, coming from such an environment where we appreciated all that my grandma did, and we showed her that through action. To see these kids be able to express themselves, and they would express themselves in very extreme ways that I wouldn't even dare express myself growing up. It truly made me just very angry that I was seeing all of these, aspects of people not seeming like they appreciated this life they have compared to what I had just experienced. And ultimately, I realized that, as much as I thought I had moved forward, that it was really me just burying all of the problems, all of the harm that I was dealt. I tried to bury it, and the reality is you can't bury it. And I thought that putting shallow dirt on it would allow it to go away, but it didn't. And it was truly hurting the relationships I was fighting so hard to build. And so forgiveness was the only way that I could truly have closure in my life to move forward so that I can start to open up my capacity for better in my life. And that was such an important step for me. And I think we have a misconception that forgiveness means that, we allow present day issues to continue to affect how we show up. So essentially, what I'm saying is, I didn't have a relationship. I don't have a relationship to this day with either parent, but that didn't mean that I couldn't have the grace to forgive them for how I was raised, so that I could be able to properly move forward with what I was being blessed to have in front of me in my life. And so I truly think that in order to seek closure, we truly have to, use that vehicle of forgiveness. Um, and the last thing I want to talk about to this point is pain. I think a big misconception is closure and forgiveness means that pain goes away. And for so long, I thought that, and I thought that, when I went through that process, that the pain in my life of all of these things that happened to me, right? Of all of the situations that I witnessed, of all of the death that I you know, experienced in my upbringing, that pain would just go away. And that's a burying experience, right? Burying these problems in shallow dirt. The reality with pain is pain as an entity will always remain in our lives. But the most impactful thing is how it affects us. I had to ask myself, am I giving power to this pain, or am I taking power from the pain and using it as a means to continue to move forward in my life and to, have continue to build on the self-determination to be the person that I need to be for the spaces I was entering and the relationships I was cultivating. It was truly a necessary experience. And so pain is the commonality, no matter how it affects you. If you're bitter about it or if you use it to your advantage, to strengthen and to continue to propel your life forward. And so that was truly the reality for forgiveness and eventually closure, is that pain isn't going to go away, but will I keep allowing it to affect me in this very harsh and grim way? So
I hear what you're saying in terms of releasing the toxicity of the pain and the negative experience and moving forward, letting it propel you towards creating the better and self-betterment. And that's deep work. So the fact that you were able to find those places within yourself as such a young person, given all that you've been through, is really, really huge.
appreciate that.
Yeah. So there's so much in your story. The book is really great, everybody. And I know that we can't cover it or fully do it justice in the time that we have set today. I want to ask one last question in terms of your story and then reflect into like the messages that you're sharing today and your mission today. And I want to just cover first before we move there is the time you had at City Year. So this is the gap year program that you went into after high school.
Yeah.
And what you were doing was, well, you can share what you were doing, but you were working with youth. And I want to hear about that impact that year had on you and your trajectory, and especially how you were able to stand with the youth that you were there for,
Yep.
given the challenging reality of your home life at that time, and share a little bit about exactly what you were going through at that time at home.
Yeah. So the 2 years that I would say were so impactful as to who I am today was, 2013, as we just shared, and 2019. That was, well, sorry, the summer of 2018 to the summer of 2019, essentially. So this year span of my life that, I didn't have the grades out of high school to look at colleges that I wanted to look at, right? My class rank out of high school was 53 out of 59 students. So very, very low. And, I had one semester of the 8 semesters in high school with a GPA above a 2.5, and 3 semesters where I had a GPA lower than a 2. So for the other 4, it was between a 2 and a 2.5. So there was really no college that would take me serious. So I decided to do this gap year program called City Year, which essentially, like I said, I essentially called us third party teachers, where we would take a group of students to work very closely with them that were on the cusp of being where they need to be for being at grade level. And that was a very interesting year for me, not only because of the program, but because of my life circumstances at home. So I shared already that, I grew up in this very, you know, decaying townhome that was not livable by almost any standard. But around that time, these bunk beds that we were sleeping on for over a decade, right? Smell awful, springs coming out of them, just the worst experience possible. The biggest blow was when the beds got infected with bed bugs. And so we had to throw them out. My grandma was like, "Yep, we gotta get these out of the house." And so we got rid of them. But the only problem is now I have nowhere to sleep at all. And my grandma was like, "All right, you can take the upstairs part of the townhome that at this point was a storage space. It lacked air. There was a very little heat from an old stove in the back, and there was a couch, and the couch was right above a leaking part of the ceiling. And so this was I had to sleep for the full year during city year on a mildew infested couch. It started with the summertime. There was no air. There wasn't even a fan to give relief on 90-degree days. And also this upstairs part was this is where the rats slept. And so there were many nights where I woke up to having to flick rats off my feet that were just at my feet playing around. And the harshest day was a winter day that in January, I'll never forget the temperature. It was negative 21 degrees Fahrenheit with a negative 60-degree wind chill. And that was a day that I truly was fighting for my life. Like I said, there was a very old stove in the back that was trying to heat up this very long and narrow townhome. And with so many holes in the ceilings and the roof, the heat was just getting taken up by that. And so it was a very hard year, but I truly pride myself for sticking through with City Year because I saw how much my grandma showed up in our lives that I knew that I wanted to make an impact on someone else's life. And I was working with young people that essentially grew up in the same area, south side of Chicago, just a different neighborhood, a few miles south. And so I looked at my circumstances as a means to be able to help people continue to move through their own life more so than I saw my own circumstances as one that I need to fix. It was kind of a a hazing, if you will, that I screwed up so much as a result of my actions and inactions and just the environment in general that I was being raised in. And now, in order for me to make something of myself, I have to go through this year of pain, unfortunately. I could have easily, taken some better paying job than a nonprofit would give me and got a nice apartment and just live life. But I knew that my calling was much deeper than that. And so I pushed past it. And I truly think that very tough time where I'm showing up every single day to give back and to pay it forward and to prove to myself that I'm college ready while having to go home in this very tough town home that I'm fighting with rats to live. And there's one specific experience of that truly highlights like why it was not livable by any standards. So around this time, Halloween 2019, or 2018, I'm sorry, that was 2018 still. There, I had candy, and my grandma had this bench that she got from, her work. She was a daycare teacher for over 30 years, so there was a bench that she had, and I kind of used the bench next to the couch as like a, something to place my phone and items I may have. And I had this candy, and I put the candy all in wrappers, all closed, next to me on this couch. And I fell asleep. And when I woke up the next morning, all the candy was gone. The rats ate all the candy. This candy was at face level on the bench right next to the couch, and it was like a few pieces of shredded up wrapper to show that they had, you know, eaten the candy that they couldn't smell because it was in wrappers. That truly is one of many examples I could give of just the harsh realities of such a situation. But of that, I truly believe that giving back with the harsh circumstances I was dealt was the foundation for the self determination in my life to be and do what I was called to do in this world. And while it was a hard year, it's one that I truly pride myself for having a level of gratitude and still finding the positives in such a negative situation to be the best person I could be and to allow other people to see their academic and personal life come to some sort of elevation, right? So,
Yes. And to continue with the elevation that you were able to propel yourself into, you then, after city year, were able to get into college and went to college. During college, you wrote this book.
mhm.
In post college, now you're beginning your work in terms of speaking, sharing your story, and sharing a lot of amazing different topics with the world. Just as an open ended question, what do you sense is your mission today? What's your calling, and what's driving you forward with the work you're doing?
Yeah, well, I think you've done a great service so far with expressing that already. But I think the mission and calling of my life is to truly try to elevate the way that the people around me, the people in this world, think and live through what I've learned, through the perspective I've gained, through the experience I have, through the research I've done, through the research I've collected. And that has led me to a place of wanting to make that impact through many realms of communication. So, being a speaker, having a book in a planning process of another book, um, eventually having my own podcast for the company the speaking company that I have, and many other realms of communication that can truly maximize and get my impact out there and what I have to say and my story and just who I am. I truly felt like that's my mission, that's my calling, and just to be the best person I can be every day. Because this is a profession when you're speaking. It is truly one that the current lived experience is just as important as anything we learn and anything I've been through, both positive and negative. It's truly a daily experience of self betterment and trying my absolute hardest to gain the perspective needed to be able to show up in any space and expand and maximize my impact. So I would say that's my mission and calling.
What do you define self betterment as? And how can we ensure that we're really living from that place daily?
Yeah. So the the extension of the word better is betterment. And so that's just a word that I use. You can use any word. You the listener. I'm sure some people use self improvement, development, whatever you use. But I love the word self betterment, and it's one that I use all the time. You will hear me say that word a lot if if I'm speaking, if and what I talk about anytime with the philosophies I've gained along the way and the current trajectory of my journey. Self betterment is simply wanting better in your life in any aspect, right? So, it could be self betterment for your physical health, mental health, spiritual journey. No matter what aspect that looks like, self betterment is essentially acknowledging that you want to improve and you want to take action and improve a certain aspect of your life. And so it's simple, but it truly has taken on a lot more impactful meaning to me with self betterment. When I think of the word thriving, I think that is where self betterment starts to take on a whole new meaning. And I know surviving versus thriving is a question, but that's self betterment is any aspect of your life that you want to improve.
Yes. Well, and take us there with the surviving and thriving. I found one area so fascinating in the book that when you were living in the north side of Chicago, You said something about, looking around and seeing that it was either in the book or when we did our call to prepare for this, but you were talking about looking around at the north side of Chicago and feeling like you were still seeing people in survival mode and not as much thriving as you'd expect given the environment. I would love for you to get to share your philosophies around surviving and thriving and your reflections on that time.
Yeah, well, I already kind of made the connection to self betterment, but I actually kind of came up with a bit of a silly example with this one. But if I had to ask you, the listener, what car would you choose? Would you choose if you had a choice, if you wanted a car and you had a car to choose, would you choose a white car or would you choose a black car? Would you choose a lighter interior of your car or would you choose a darker interior of your car? And the reality is, a lot of us would choose the darker car and or the darker interior because it it's very hard to see that it's dirty. It's very hard to see the flaws in a darker car or a car with a darker interior. But that doesn't take away the fact that this dirt is still there, just as it would be in a white car or a lighter exterior car that we can physically see with our eyes. And that's how I see survival versus thriving. I think survival is where people are on a course of self betterment in one or a few aspects of their life. And generally, especially when we are looking at areas that, you know, has an abundant quality of life or that prioritizes, I'll say, an abundant quality of life, the aspects of our lives that are appealing to the American dream, right? Having a house, having a nice profession, just whatever aspects that we get validation from, that people can physically see, that we may feel proud of, those are the areas that we resign to the depths of comfort and stability. And growth goes from wanting those things to when you have them, when I need to show up for it basis. Versus thriving to me is every aspect of our lives are on a course of self betterment and improving. And obviously, there will be seasons where you are able to prioritize some aspects over others, but or you may not have a choice, right, due to whatever circumstances. But to put significant effort daily toward improving every aspect of our lives, so that we may show up in a healthier and a greater capacity. I truly think that's where we start to think about thriving. And it really is knowing a lot of things, right? Who you are on a core level. Are you finding yourself or are you creating yourself? Because a lot of times we've had to find ourselves through environments that were already pre-coursed for us, right? I believe that most people succeed or fail mainly in accordance to the normalcy of their environment, meaning that it's very unlikely that we see people exceedingly rise above or exceedingly fail beyond what was normal in the environment. And along with that comes this standard for how we should live, how we should think, how we should act. And once we have that element of, you know, where we think we should be, we just level off. And we don't really care about improving, and we don't care about refining our perspective, and we don't care about increasing our capacity, and we don't care about, gratitude as much because we have what people will praise us for. We have the career, we have the job title, right? We have those elements that people can see and identify. And when I moved to the north side of Chicago, as we stated, I thought for so long because we generally look at survival in this country, especially as those who are monetarily lacking, right? Don't have the resources to further your life in any capacity. And I once believed that as well. But when I moved up north and I started to believe like, man, these people like, you know, look at where they live, look at the environment, look at, them being able to focus on all of these other aspects that people just didn't have the time to where I lived. Like this is clearly thriving, right? I'm in the thriving environment. But the reality is once you start to go deeper with people than just seeing what they have, that's when you truly see that no, survival is not exclusive to people who are lacking in a monetary sense, but it truly is every aspect that needs attention, that needs effort, that needs improvement for us to truly say we're driving. And so I have a presentation on that, and it goes into that. It's a very great presentation, but it's truly something that I think has been eye opening for my journey and just furthering my perspective and expertise in that regard. It's been very eye opening for sure.
And I've loved hearing about your reflections on that. And what I'm hearing from you too is that a big piece of that difference is the intentionality and showing up in each moment in each part of our life with presence and intentionality. And you really do that, Jeffrey, in every way. And so I know we're coming up close on our time. I want to hear about what what message would you love to share with the broader business community and others who haven't had a childhood upbringing like you did? You know, in what ways can we show up to be there to help support or somehow participate in a better the better way? Like what can people do?
Yeah. So that's so many ways to answer such an intentional question. So I want to present, well, I think it's two parts to that, right? One, speaking to the, business community, but also going into relation as to how they can support people that are growing up in circumstances that I did, right? And so I was looking at these stats because I truly think that we see these experiences no matter, what anyone's current circumstances are. And in many capacities, we see a lack of drive, of fulfillment that is making an impact down the down the line, no matter what your circumstances are. So I, pulled some of these stats from a presentation I have, and it truly highlights the stark reality of the workplace and how it translates to how people show up in their own lives and the lives of others. But according to the CNBC, 60% of people reported feeling detached at work, and 19% as miserable at work. 30% of people, only 30% of people felt engaged, while that is a percentage lower than it was in 2020 actually. The same source found that in the US alone, 50% of workers are stressed daily, 40% of workers are consistently worried, 22% as sad, and 18% is angry. Bess McBride found that 70% of people work at a job they don't love, right? That is 2 out of every 3 people that we see. And finally, a Deloitte study found that only 13% of the workforce is passionate about what they do. And so I think in general, we see that there are elements missing that affects how we are able to show up for ourselves in our work, for our company, and for the lives of any person. And I think one of the questions I had to ask myself, right? And I'm sorry that this message is very broad for everybody. I don't think that I could have given anything that was specific for one group and specific for another group. But in my own life, as I was trying to continue to elevate, my life in every capacity, I had to ask myself the question of like, aren't you tired of losing? And that is the question that we should be asking ourselves every day, in our own lives, in how we show up for others, in how we as a society, when we look at the numbers, when we look at, people not being passionate about what they do, because we have to ask ourselves, how does that affect us on the back end, right? Now we see a dwindling in innovation and things that truly allow the world to continue to progress on a healthy trajectory. So I think it's really about being on a course of wanting to change and reshape a losing culture. And I think that comes with, like I said, knowing who we are and knowing who we are on the core level. That is extremely important. And how can we create ourselves to be very intentional with our mission in this world, with our calling in this world, and also empathy, right? The ability to diversify your perspective in life, to see more perspectives than your own, and to eventually come to the realization that your perspective may be wrong, or it may be one that you want to shift, you want to completely alter. I think that's something that we all can take with us in our own lives, no matter what your current circumstances are, no matter what you feel your mission is for people that grew up like I did, right? I think as a society, going specifically to the question of how to show up for people that grew up in areas I did, in society, we went from no empathy for people in their circumstances, in my opinion, to a pendulum shift of an overexertion of sympathy. And the thing that is constantly missing is empathy, and helping individuals get to a path in their own lives of understanding what an adequate quality of life looks like and getting to that point, right? I was there. I have all of my family members are still there. And when I talk to my cousins who are, teenagers, they tell me every single day that they're afraid that they're going to be shot and killed in their own environment. These are teenagers. Not talking to some adults that embraces the street life. We're talking about kids who are just trying their hardest to be something in this world one day. And so that truly takes a reshifting of how we view people in these realities, and moving through a place of empathy and helping people to improve the quality of their life. And I think it's been extremely disheartening to see people that want these young people and just people in general to have some sense of satisfaction with where they are, because satisfaction should never be in any of our vocabulary, because we should all be on a trajectory of wanting more and wanting better. And I can identify that with the young people in these environments. And I think it takes a societal understanding that we want everybody to have and move in an adequate quality of life. I keep saying that word, or I keep saying that phrase, quality of life, because it's important. And I wasn't living a healthy quality of life growing up. It took me a while to identify that, but now I can humbly say that I am living a much better quality of life than I ever did in my life. And that truly took amazing people in my life to continue to challenge me and challenge my growth, because growth isn't as simple as getting an opportunity or receiving this abundance of monetary resources, but it truly is improving every single aspect of your life so that you can show up and do this thing called life every day as efficiently as possible. So I hope that answered the question.
Well, to just reflect back to the first thing I heard you address is that the need for each of us individually to really be accountable to ourselves. And if we're first thing to check is, am I living with intentionality
Yeah,
and reaching for thriving within my own life? Because if I'm not doing that, how could I ever try to help anybody
exactly.
do something better? And if I'm not calling my own emotional, psychological, mental habits and patterns that pull me down into question, then I'm not going to be any inspiration to anybody
Yeah.
else. And then the second thing I'm hearing you say too, and let me know if I'm getting any of this incorrectly, but it's not so much about, well, first of all, you said the difference between sympathy and empathy. And a big part of the difference I hear is that sympathy feels like pity and empathy feels like connection.
Yeah.
And let me know if there's anything else you'd like to add with those words and the difference. And I also heard you share of showing up for people in their journey of growth, which sounds like very individual and personalized, therefore, in terms of what support looks like.
Yeah.
It's showing up for an individual and knowing and sensing into where you can be supportive on their path
Mhm.
specifically.
Yeah.
It's not about thinking support and empowerment is a dollar sign or a sharing of a post, or these things that I think that, feel, I don't know, like you said, are the things that people say they're doing, but question the effectiveness of the lives that they're really impacting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times we think in society that if I'm giving, and I'm not pouring into myself, that is a very special thing. That's something that
Mm.
my grandma even did to a certain capacity. A lot of people think that's admirable. I personally don't. I think many times when we see someone that is, giving, and not pouring into their own life, I think that the impact that you give is compromised. And I talk about that in a lot of presentations that I have, that we have to make sure that we are on the ideal path before we can show up and truly make a difference in anyone else's life. And in order for like I said, the impact, the perspectives to be refined, to be as impactful as possible, we truly have to understand that everybody should be on a mission to doing the work in their own lives to see what they want to see first before you can want to support anyone else. I think to the point of, how can people show up in the lives of any person in life? I think it truly takes us to be able to identify within ourselves, again, where we want to be, but also how can we intentionally show up and prioritize connection, right? Prioritize relationships in a way that doesn't gives us this one size fits all approach, because not often do you hear an experience and perspective like mine, right? Not often do you hear someone growing up in a very tough situation, and you have to ask yourself, you want to make a difference, how do you show up in someone's life like mine, right? Because there was so much that I was lacking due to a lack of nurturing, due to the bare aspects of the environment. There was so much that was missing, and we have to ask ourselves, how do we truly show up and make a difference? And I don't think that's sympathy and this sense of pity. Pity just is not going to help the world, right? We truly need a cultural and mentality shift that gets us to a place where everybody gets to enjoy the fruits of adequate and healthy society.
Hmm.
So I hope that makes sense. But
It does. And one of the biggest things each of us needs to do to support that healthy society is be a full, whole, healthy person in it.
exactly.
And also, what I'm hearing from what you're saying is, as much as we're able to embrace our own callings and our own missions from those places, we can do the best good with our lives. Be the most um, helpful, empowering, and supportive person, because we're really showing up as ourselves.
Exactly. Everybody benefits for sure. Everybody benefits when we're all on that course. So I think when we think about any aspect, right? When we think about how to improve, company and organization, a school setting, no matter what aspects we're looking at, there's a lot of people that make great differences in this world, and it's a great thing no matter how you look at it. But the reality is we're seeing the same issues, right? So where I grew up, and I always say this because I don't really hear people talk about it, but in 2021, 800 people on the south and west sides of Chicago, and a few up north, were murdered in 1 year. 800 people, and that was the highest number seen in a 25-year span. So clearly the problems aren't going away, and clearly we see that, no empathy wasn't the answer, but also sympathy is not the answer. And it truly looks like, how do we want to help people improve their lives? And it comes with understanding that, one, our own lives need to be on a course of self-betterment in every aspect, so thriving, but also how can we truly lead a life of support, of connection, of accountability, because that to me is what a lot of people want. When I talk to my cousins, that's what they want. They want an environment where they actually feel like they can be kids. They're not looking for sympathy. They're hoping that they don't get shot at any point, right? To hear a teenager or any kid say that they're afraid that they're going to lose their life, I think that's something that we truly need to step back and reflect on. What does that look like, right? What does that look like for you to have to raise your kid in an environment like that? It's not fun. And like I said, I don't think that monetary abundance will fix that, right? It's going to take everybody to be on a course of a mentality shift to understand the purpose beyond, everybody having this abundance of financial prosperity. I don't think that's the proper course, at least from what I've seen in my life and what I've learned along the way.
I'm hearing you say it's not just money that can solve any of these problems, and moments of genuine human connection, like what you're doing on the phone with your family and the young people, your nephews and nieces, and that's a part of it.
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay, Jeffrey, this has been a very powerful conversation, and you are nothing but a shining light in this world, and what you stand for and how you are an embodiment of everything that you preach and teach. And so how can people get in touch with you if they're wanting to be able to hear more or have you be a speaker at any event or something for their workplace?
Yeah.
Where can we be in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a company, The Speaking Realm, which is like I said, speaking company, bridges multiple aspects of communication to reach as many people as possible. To learn more about that company, you can go to thespeakingrealm.com. And I have topics. Well, I have a contact piece on a website where you can reach me at any contact piece that you see that you want to connect with me on. So the contacts are there. And I also have topics that I speak about, 6 topics, and you can check them out, hear the summaries. I verbally gave the summaries of each presentation, so you can hear those. I do have a video as like a founder statement, and it's truly an impactful video. And 1 minute that the video is 1 to 2 minute video. Also, on that website, you can find my book that's behind Catherine. I've gotten nothing but great reviews on the book, and I'm very grateful that it's making the difference that I was hoping it make. And I'm excited for the next book that I'm gonna be working on soon. So yeah, any way that you want to reach out or connect with me in any way, you can go to thespeakingrealm.com, and you should be able to find me.
Wonderful. And we will make sure to list your website in the show notes so that listeners can find your information and more about your speaking topics and everything. And Jeffrey, just one more time, thank you for everything that you shared with the level of vulnerability and openness that you did. And just beyond grateful for your time and your presence, your intentionality, and the message that you've shared with all of us. It's very impactful.
Yeah, and I want to thank you and the Expanders Project, the Skinny Platform, for giving me the opportunity to come on here and share my story. And it's truly an honor to be here and to be able to have a platform to continue to expand my impact, and people just hear a humbling story. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and we look forward to next time. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Expanders Podcast, presented by The Skinny Platform. You can catch more episodes and be notified of newly released episodes by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or subscribing on YouTube. For more information on the Expanders Podcast and The Skinny Platform, visit our website, www.theskinnyplatform.com.